You are listening to Practical and Woo by Mindset and Manifest. My name is Eden, and I invite you to embark on a journey with me to explore the practical and spiritual edges of the unknown for the purpose of allowing you to embody and empower yourself uniquely as you are and to intentionally create and live a life of freedom and fulfillment. Each week, I am going to discuss topics such as energetics, reality creation, manifestation, astrology, tarot, and more to help empower you to live beyond perceived limitations and to practically design your life so it feels like absolute magic every step of the way. Let's dive in. Well, hello, brilliant soul. There's a particular brand of shame that arrives when your lived experience, the very same one that's shaping you and has been shaping you all along, looks strange or unconventional from the outside. It's the kind of shame that's attached with having walked a path that doesn't translate cleanly into polite conversation, tidy narratives, or socially approved milestones. It's the kind of shame that surfaces when you can feel in your bones that something truly mattered because it moved you and changed who you are forever. And yet, you can already anticipate the raised eyebrow or the awkward pause or the impulse to explain yourself and your experience to other people. This episode is dedicated to the moments when you trust your life is unfolding as it should, shaping you into who you're meant to become, all the while still feeling the sting of being misunderstood, misread, or quietly judged for your lived experience. We are rarely taught how to hold experiences that are confusing to others. We are trained instead to curate coherence and to edit out the chapters that feel embarrassing when measured against someone else's rubric for a good life. We learn early that belonging comes with things that are easily understood and easily categorized. But this is directly in conflict with the fact that growth rarely, if ever, moves in straight lines. When your path includes detours, repetitions, reversals, returns, strange fixations, or lessons that only make sense in hindsight, you can end up carrying the quiet mental and emotional load that comes with it. You know something was real, yet you feel pressure to either defend it or diminish it. Shame thrives in this gap between an inner knowing and the desire to be externally recognized. It whispers that if your experience were valid, it would look more respectable. It suggests that if you were wiser, more evolved, better put together, then perhaps you wouldn't have needed to learn this lesson in this way or for this long. Shame feeds on comparison and imagined audiences. It asks you to see yourself through the eyes of an observer who doesn't have access to your inner life or your context, to your nervous system, your history, or the precise sequence of events that brought you here to this moment that you're finding yourself. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, it can teach you to abandon yourself in favor of managing someone else's perception. And here we are to name that you don't have to do that. There's a difference between reflection and self surveillance. Reflection is inward and curious, and it ever evolves. It asks, what did this experience show me? What did it change? Who am I becoming through this? Self surveillance, on the other hand, is outward and constricting. It asks, how does this look? What will people think? How can I make this more acceptable? When shame is active, it nudges you towards self surveillance over self reflection. You replay conversations in your head and rehearse your explanations just in case you need a quick answer to someone asking how you've been. You preemptively judge your own choices before anyone else can. You learn to tell your story in a way that softens the edges, removes the awkward beats, and sanitizes any perceived mess. Over time, this habit erodes trust with yourself. You begin to doubt your own instincts, not because they're wrong, but because they're tremendously painful. So, how can we show up in a way that doesn't cause us to erase or diminish ourselves? Well, you begin by reclaiming your position as the primary authority on your life. So many of us were raised, whether consciously or unconsciously, to outsource to authority figures on what our lives are meant to look like and how we're meant to think about them. And when your life deviates from the template that you were given, our old training kicks in. You look around for reassurance that you're still doing it right. And when that reassurance doesn't arrive, especially when it doesn't arrive in the tidy packaging that you're hoping for it to, shame is what fills the space between. There's a quiet courage in letting your experience be incomplete in the eyes of others, in allowing a chapter to remain open ended, unresolved, or poorly summarized, in resisting the urge to turn your life into a case study with a moral at the end of it. Some experiences are still composting. Some lessons are mid spiral. Some stories cannot be told cleanly without flattening its truth. The pressure to explain often arises from an unconscious belief that if you cannot justify your choices, then they somehow lose their legitimacy. This belief is so deeply ingrained, and it's also false. Meaning doesn't require consensus. Holding the knowing that you are walking as you are meant to walk involves strengthening your relationship with your own internal signals, the quiet ones that surface in moments where you're being honest with yourself. It's a sweet feeling of relief when you surrender to the moment that you're finding yourself in, embracing it, and reminding yourself that it's okay, that it's allowed. Mistakes, warts, errors, growing edges, these aren't interruptions to the path that's unfolding for you. They're part of the texture and the landscape. A life without visible missteps would be a life lived entirely within the confines of what's already known, approved, and safe. Growth asks something else of us. It asks us to enter terrain where feedback is delayed and where intuition leads before logic has the time to catch up. It's the space where learning happens through experience rather than step by step instruction. From the outside, this can look inefficient or indulgent or naive, but from the inside, it often feels necessary, even in the moments where it feels greatly uncomfortable. And we know those moments all too well. Projection is an inevitable thing when you're living in a way that challenges someone else's roadmap of reality. People project their fears, regrets, unlived dreams, and unresolved wounds onto those who deviate from an expected script. When someone reacts strongly to your choices, it's rarely about what you did. Perhaps the perceived experience threatens the story they tell themselves about what's possible for them. Perhaps it activates a place where they complied at a great personal cost. Perhaps it reminds them of a risk that they never took. None of this makes their reaction malicious per se. It also makes it not yours to carry. Holding space for projection doesn't mean that you need to absorb it. It means that you're recognizing it without internalizing it. This requires your discernment and knowing that not every opinion deserves equal weight, and not every raised eyebrow is an invitation for self correction. When you feel the familiar urge to defend and explain or shrink yourself, it can be helpful to pause and ask, whose discomfort am I trying to soothe here? Is there an actual repair needed, or am I responding to something that's imagined? Often, shame pushes us to take responsibility for feelings that aren't ours in order to preempt rejection by self editing and self erasing. Committing to releasing this pattern is a practice, it's not a one time decision. In other words, committing to this practice is something that you hone over time. There's also grief in this work. Grief for the versions of yourself that tried so hard to be understood. Grief for the safety you associated with approval. Grief for the relationships that shifted when you stopped performing. Grief for the transition into putting yourself first for the very first time. Naming grief matters because without acknowledging it, you may unconsciously keep bargaining with the past and offer explanations in exchange for conditional acceptance. Letting go of this need to bargain your value opens space for a different kind of belonging that's rooted in resonance, acceptance, and unconditional love. You don't need everyone to understand your path. You need to understand it enough to stay with yourself because growth includes coming to terms with an honest reckoning. It includes naming where you acted from fear, where you bypassed your own needs, where you stayed longer than was kind to yourself, where you are grateful you gave the chances you did. Shame collapses nuance and turns complex learning into a single demeaning verdict or outcome. Emotional maturity, however, restores complexity in a situation. It allows you to hold multiple truths at the same time. One of the most destabilizing aspects of walking an unconventional path is the loneliness that can accompany it. When your experiences are hard to summarize, you may stop sharing them altogether. You sometimes learn which parts of your life invite curiosity and which ones invite concern. You may find yourself editing mid sentence, sensing when the room's energy shifts. And over time, this can create a sense of isolation, even when you're not technically alone. The remedy here is not to overshare in search of validation, but instead to cultivate spaces where your lived complexity is welcome. This might be with a therapist, a mentor, or a friend who listens without fixing, or it could be in your own private written exploration. Being witnessed accurately, even by one person, can metabolize years of quiet shame that you've held. There's also a form of self witnessing that doesn't rely on external mirrors at all. This is the practice of tracking your own evolution with honesty and also care, noticing your patterns, making moments of choice, acknowledging courage that no one else saw. When you become fluent in your own story, you're less vulnerable to distortion. You are less likely to abandon yourself when someone else misunderstands you. This fluency doesn't require you to have a polished narrative or everything all figured out. It simply requires your presence. It's worth naming that some shame comes from absorbing ideas about which lessons are noble and which ones are trivial, which struggles are respectable, and which ones are considered embarrassing. We learn that certain forms of pain earn respect, while others are dismissed as drama or poor decision making. These narratives are culturally constructed, and they're also deeply unhelpful. Pain doesn't need to be impressive to be formative, and growth doesn't need to be efficient to be real. When you catch yourself minimizing your own experience because it doesn't meet an imagined standard, you're enforcing a rule that was never designed with your humanity in mind. There's a quiet power in letting your life be unrelatable to some people. Relatability is often praised as a virtue, yet it can become a constraint that binds you to everything you're actually trying to avoid. When you contort your story to make it digestible, you completely lose access to its medicine. The very aspects that feel awkward or excessive may be the very ones that hold the deepest learning. Allowing those aspects to exist without dimming is an act of trust, and it signals that you believe your life is inherently intelligent, even when it defies what's easy, convenient, or perfect. You may notice that as you release the need to justify yourself, certain dynamics change. Some people will lean in and act curious and respectful towards you. Others will pull away, feeling unsettled by the absence of a familiar script that they relied on. This isn't your failure, it's simply information for you to observe. When you stop managing perception, you create clearer and cleaner data about what's genuine, and you find and discover what's possible for you. This clarity can sometimes feel disorienting at first, especially if you're someone who's accustomed to maintaining harmony in your life and within your environments. But over time, this is a practice that becomes stabilizing as you begin to sense where you can allow yourself to be your whole, complete, beautiful self. It's also important to acknowledge that being misunderstood can hurt even when you know that your path is valid. The goal here is not to become immune to judgment, but instead to recover more quickly when it lands, to feel the contraction, name it, and return to yourself anyway, to resist the urge to rewrite your life in a language that was never one you were meant to speak in the first place, to remember that the people who truly matter in your life will be the ones who can sit with ambiguity alongside with you and who respect your process without needing to approve every single detail. One of the most grounding questions you can ask yourself when shame arises is, what did this experience give me that I would not have learned any other possible way? This question isn't about silver linings or cultivating forced moments of gratitude. It's actually about recognizing specificity, that your life is teaching you in a language tailored to you and your temperament, your history, and your ever growing capacity. Someone else's path would not have produced the same insights. And when you honor this knowing, comparison naturally loses its grip. You are allowed to change your mind about how you tell your story. You are allowed to say less. You are allowed to say that you're still making meaning of it. You are allowed to let people draw their own conclusions without rushing to correct them. As you continue walking your path, there will be moments when the old shame resurfaces, whether in response to a question asked with a wrong tone, a casual comment that lands harder than expected, or a social setting that highlights your shortcomings. These moments don't mean you have failed to overcome anything. They're simply reminders that you're human and that you're wired for connection. The work is not to eradicate shame, but to meet it with curiosity rather than the belief that it's real. To notice when it tries to pull you into explanation and to choose to stay present with yourself instead. Your life doesn't need to look sensible to be beautiful, nor does it need to be impressive to be meaningful. Your life doesn't need to be understood to be worthy, because the path you're on is expertly shaped by an artisan who is helping you to grow into the version you're asking to be. And that artisan is you. Walk in your journey with your head held high and let others navigate the terrain that's theirs. Until next time.